In the spring of 1936, a letter arrives at Cayce's home in Virginia Beach. It's not asking about a business decision or a health problem or a lost object, the kinds of questions that filled most of his mail. It's from a mother. Her son died 6 weeks earlier. He was 4 years old. She doesn't ask Cayce to bring him back. She doesn't ask for a miracle. She asks one question, the same question that has been asked by grieving parents in every language, in every century, long before anyone had a word for what Cayce did. Is he all right, wherever he is? Cayce gave the reading. What he said isn't the point of this video, not yet. What matters first is that he gave it at all, and what it cost him to keep giving readings like it, year after year, to parents who had nothing left to offer him but their grief. Most of what gets discussed about Edgar Cayce is the spectacle, the prophecies, the lost continents, the psychic diagnoses that sound like something out of a novel. What gets left out is quieter and harder to package into a viral thumbnail. For over 20 years, a significant portion of his mail came from parents who had lost a child, asking in one form or another if their son or daughter still existed somewhere. Cayce wasn't trained for this. He wasn't a grief counselor, a chaplain, or a therapist. He was, by every account from people who knew him, uncomfortable with the responsibility these letters put on him. He worried about saying the wrong thing to someone already in the worst pain of their life. There are records of him postponing these particular readings, rereading the letters more than once before he could bring himself to go under. That hesitation matters. So it's easy, looking back with 60 years of retrospective mythology, to imagine him as someone who had answers on demand. He didn't. He described feeling a specific kind of dread before these sessions, not because he doubted what might come through, but because he understood, more than most people in his position would, that he was standing between somebody's unbearable question and whatever answer might land in a room with no doctor, no science, and no way to verify it against anything. There's a detail in the correspondence that rarely makes it into documentaries. Several of these letters arrived not from strangers, but from people who had already written to Cayce once before, years earlier, asking for a health reading for the very child who had since died. Reading through those files in sequence, the earlier letter hopeful, the later one broken, is its own kind of quiet devastation. It means Cayce, in some of these cases, wasn't meeting grief for the first time. He was watching a family he already knew move from hope to loss and being asked to speak into that loss again. He kept doing it anyway. Not for money. The fees he charged were modest, and many of these readings were given for free to families who had already spent what they had on funerals, and before that, on doctors who couldn't save their children. He did it by his own account, because turning away someone in that condition felt like a cruelty he couldn't justify, even if he had no certainty about what he was offering them. His secretary at the time later described the toll these particular sessions took on him, that he would emerge from trance, visibly shaken, in a way that didn't happen after readings about business or physical illness. Whatever was happening in those moments, it wasn't performance. Something about sitting inside a parent's grief, even secondhand, seems to have cost him something real every time. Strip away the drama, and the content of these readings is almost startling in its restraint. Cayce didn't describe elaborate visions of the afterlife, didn't offer parents dramatic reassurance designed to provoke tears and gratitude. What comes through in the archived transcripts again and again is something closer to a repeated, quiet insistence. That consciousness, whatever that word meant to him, didn't end where the body did. That the relationship between a parent and a child wasn't severed by death, only changed in a way neither he nor the grieving parent could fully describe. To the mother in 1936, the reading suggested her son remained close to her in a way she wouldn't be able to prove. Only sense, in ordinary moments, not supernatural ones. Not a ghost story, something quieter than that. In another case, a father who had lost a teenage daughter to illness asked, almost angrily, why it had happened, what purpose it could possibly have served. Cayce's reading didn't offer the kind of tidy justification you'd expect from someone trying to comfort a stranger. It acknowledged in its own halting way that the reading itself couldn't answer why with the certainty the father wanted. What it offered instead was smaller, and in its own way more honest. That grief of that size doesn't get resolved by an explanation, only carried differently over time. This is worth pausing on, because it cuts against the version of Cayce that gets circulated in clip form. Psychic superhero, dispenser of cosmic certainty. The actual record shows something more careful. A man who, when faced with the rawest form of human pain, resisted the temptation to manufacture comfort he didn't actually have access to. He said what came through, and where nothing clear came through, he said that too. There's a case less discussed because it doesn't flatter him, where a grieving mother wrote back furious, saying the reading hadn't helped, that she'd wanted something more concrete. Cayce didn't defend himself elaborately. By the account of people close to him, he accepted that some of what he gave people simply wasn't what they needed, and that this was a real limitation, not a mystery to be explained away. That's not the story of a man selling certainty to the vulnerable. It's the story of someone who kept showing up to an impossible task without pretending the task was easier than it was. It's also worth naming what these readings were not. They weren't scripts he reused from family to family. Each one is distinct, shaped by the specific details of the letter in front of him, the child's age, the circumstances of the death. Some readings ran long and detailed. Others, especially in cases of sudden or violent loss, are notably shorter, almost restrained, as though even the reading itself was treading carefully. That inconsistency is easy to read as evidence against him, proof he was simply improvising. It can just as easily be read the other way, a real response to real non-repeating grief, rather than a formula applied indiscriminately to anyone who wrote in. Here's the part this channel isn't going to soften. None of this proves anything about what happens to a child after they die. No reading, however sincere, is evidence in the way a controlled study is evidence. If you came here hoping for confirmation that death isn't the end, this isn't proof of that, and pretending otherwise would be a disservice to exactly the kind of pain this video is about. But there's something else here worth taking seriously, separate from the metaphysics. Grief researchers today, people with no interest in psychic phenomena at all, have spent the last few decades documenting something called continuing bonds. The finding, now well established in bereavement psychology, that the healthiest long-term outcome for grieving parents isn't moving on from the relationship with a lost child, but maintaining an ongoing, evolving connection to them through memory, ritual, a felt sense of presence. This replaced an older clinical model that treated any lingering attachment to the deceased as a sign of unresolved grief. Cayce, working decades before that research existed, was telling parents something strikingly close to it. Not let go, but the relationship continues in a form you'll have to learn how to carry. He had no clinical framework for this. He wasn't citing research because there was none yet to cite, but the shape of what he offered, presence without proof, continuity without closure, turns out to resemble, uncannily, what grief science would later find actually helps. Maybe that's the more honest way to hold this story. Not Cayce proved the afterlife, which the evidence doesn't support, but a man with no formal training, operating from something he couldn't explain, kept landing on an idea about grief that took mainstream psychology another 60 years of careful study to arrive at from a completely different direction. We don't know, and this video won't pretend to know, what actually happened when Cayce went into a trance and spoke about a child who had died. Whatever it was, some form of genuine insight, an unusually attuned form of compassion, or something else entirely, the effect on the people receiving it seems to have been less about answers and more about permission. Permission to keep loving someone who was gone, without being told that love needed an expiration date. If you've lost someone, a child, a parent, anyone the loss reorganized your life around, you already know that closure was never really the goal. The bond doesn't close. It changes shape. You still set the table for one more person out of habit sometimes. You still hear a song and reach for your phone to send it to them before you remember. None of that is a failure to grieve properly. If anything, the newer research suggests it's closer to what grieving, well, actually looks like. Cayce, in his own uncertain, imperfect way, seemed to understand that before almost anyone had the language to say it clearly. He never claimed to know where the boy from that 1936 letter had gone, or what all right even meant in that context. He just seemed to believe reading after reading, that the question itself, is he all right wherever he is, deserve to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as something grief makes people ask. Maybe that's worth more than a definitive answer about the afterlife ever could be.